Good morning to one and all who gathered here. Always welcome the new day with beautiful hopes, ambition and aims in your life. Have a beautiful, with these wishes, I welcome you all once again.
The way things work out best for those who make the best of how things work out. Likewise, here we have a person like the above said word, who is none other than Dr. R. Umashankar, INSA Honorary Scientist, University of Agricultural Science, Bangalore. Sir obtained his PhD in crop physiology from the University of Agricultural Science, Bangalore. His current area of interest is in plant evolutionary biology, conservative genetics, bioprospecting and data mining. Currently, Sir is working as a professor at the Department of Crop Science, Bangalore. Sir is an elected fellow of the Indian Academy of Science, Bangalore. He was a Fulbright fellow at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. In the area of plant evolutionary biology, along with his colleague Dr. K. N. Ganeshaya, he was instrumental in extending for the first time socio-biological concepts to plants. He contributed significantly to prospecting for camptothecin, an anti-cancer metabolite.
Now I request Dr. Amarnath Pandian, Assistant Professor, Department of Botany, to honor our guest. Thank you very much, sir. Now I request you to take over the session, sir.
And I am told that today is the fourth day of your meeting? Okay, good. So you've been enjoying this workshop for the last 3 days nicely? Okay, good. So, as Madam introduced me to all of you, my basic background is plant evolutionary biology, and I sort of work in my lab trying to ask why flowers are of different colors. Why should some flowers be white? Why should some be yellow, red? I ask this question, why and how plants evolved on this earth. Also, our lab talks about or does work on the evolution of photosynthesis in the leaves of the plant. How did photosynthesis evolve? But for this morning, what I thought is, all that is too heavy stuff. You know, already you people are studying so much for your examinations, isn't it? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
And you don't want another such a heavy talk. Yes? Yes. So I thought I will give some, or maybe engage, I won't say talk, I'll engage you in trying to see a little bit more than what we normally talk in classrooms. Correct? Let the classrooms be for the teachers. And here we'll talk something out of the classroom. So let me start my talk, whose title I've simply called as "To Wonder is to Discover," by asking one question to all of you. So the answer is? Mother. Why? Mother is the first teacher. But see, many things that I'm going to talk today are serious, but some of them also for joke. Someone asked me this question, who's greater, mother or teacher? Like all of you, I told mother is greater. He told no, it is teacher who's greater. I asked him why. He told, a teacher can make 50 children sleep in 5 minutes. Whereas a mother takes 15 minutes to put one child to sleep. So who's greater? Teacher. Second question. So, is it difficult to listen or to deliver lecture? I thought a good number of students also told it's difficult to listen to a lecture, isn't it? Why? Because, let us admit, isn't it? Except this one. Okay. So, with this little background and having woken you up from your sleep, let me take you through this talk. This talk is not going to be in any ways any structured talk. Please feel free. Your sir has told me that we have time between 10 and 12 o'clock. 2 hours. Okay? In this time, let us make the most of it. And what I would like you to do in my class or in this lecture is kindly participate. Okay? Stop me wherever you want. Raise your hand or get up or whatever. Feel free to ask any question, even if it is the most, in your mind, appears to be the most silliest of it. Because I feel as a scientist, you should not hesitate to ask questions. Okay? So with these few prefatory remarks, let me take you through some stories. And I have lots of stories to tell you. I can stop anytime. Let me consider this first example. And how many of you will agree with the sentence written? Have you ever wondered why men are good at some tasks while women are not? And please remember, I will be asking questions after questions to you in this lecture. So you should answer. Whether right or wrong, I don't care. Okay? So do you all agree with the sentence?
Yes, sir.
How many of you disagree with the sentence? Don't feel shy. This class is not to feel shy. All of you can come out and open and raise your hands. Okay? What's your name?
Kanimoni.
Huh?
Kanimoni.
Kanimoni. Why do you disagree?
Because we are also one. Why we need to? We should be perfect in everything. So we should not. As women, we should not do that. We should be better than men.
So, you are saying, have you ever wondered why men are good at some tasks while women are not? You say that women are also good at some tasks while men are not. Is that what you are saying? Correct? Anyone else who would like to sort of defend their answer? This side, please. Someone raise their hands. Please feel free to talk. Please sit down, anyone. Anyone else? Okay. Now let me put this next slide. Can you read what I have written? Have you ever wondered why women are good at some tasks while men are not? The two slides are the same. All that I have done is, look here, in the earlier slide, I put why men are good at some tasks while women are not. And the second slide is just the vice versa. The sentences don't change the meaning, isn't it? Now, why was the slide put? Look at this car that is parked so nicely, isn't it? And there is this lady standing next to the car. What do you get the general impression if I sort of put the sentence here? It says that, oh, maybe this lady is responsible for parking this car like that. She managed to park the car like that when everyone else has parked it correctly. Or it's likely that her husband has parked the car like this and she's saying, what the hell, how have you parked the car? Isn't it? See, it's open for interpretation both ways. Yes or no? Students of science, as students of science, and this is a science camp, first thing what I want you to keep in mind is never close your mind two possibilities. Both possibilities are here. It is not that the woman has parked the car properly. It is probably the husband or some other man who may have parked the car horribly wrongly. So both alternatives are there, and this is the beauty of science. It's open to any possibilities. We as scientists will have to struggle and find out what is the correct answer. But that's a different issue. We all know evolutionarily men and women have sort of specialized in the task performances. Men are good at some, women are good at some. Men are lousy at some, women are lousy at some. All of you will agree? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
There's nothing wrong about it. It's in the course of evolution, we have specialized in some tasks and some other tasks for each of the gender. But this small observation did not or was begging for some explanation at a more scientific level. And one lady whose name is Ragini Verma, who happens to be an Indian, she did her PhD from IIT Delhi in the Department of Image Processing. Okay? And this lady today is an assistant professor at University of Pennsylvania, again in the same department of Digital Image Processing Lab. She was interested in this question about, is there any neural basis for these different tasks that women and men perform? So what she did, she decided to ask if our neural circuitry of men and women are different, and so she took the brain scans. She didn't take the brain, she took the scans, agreed, of men and women, 428 men and 521 women, and then mapped using MRI the sort of neural circuitry in the brains of these two genders. And let me tell you what she got. She got this picture. There are two brains. They are real sort of scaled to some level. The size of the male and female brain. One is female, another is male. There's no difference in the size of the male and female brains. You saw that? Both the brains are of the same size. But what you want to see here is that in one of the brains, I won't tell you which sex, this branches, what you see, connects the neural foci to each other within each of the hemisphere, within the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. Whereas in another brain of another sex, I won't tell you which sex is that, these branches seem to be crisscrossing between the left and the right hemisphere of the brain. You see here, so much crisscrossing, whereas in this brain, the branching, the neural branching are within the left and within the right hemisphere. Okay? Now, the question to you. Which of the two brains belongs to a woman? So can we simply raise the hand? If you ask, I'll repeat the question. Which of the two brains? Let's say this brain belongs to which gender? Can you raise your hands? Can you please raise your hands? Women, whoever told women, can you raise your hands please? Yeah, don't feel shy. We are now having a class, real discussion here. Very good. And thank you, those who have not raised their hand, you attribute this brain to be belonging to a man. Now, can anyone, just for the heck of it, who rose the hand for saying this is belonging to a woman, can you give an explanation for that? Can you defend your answer? Anyone? One of you. Why did you say that this brain belongs to that of a woman? This is the problem. Many of you raise your hand. I want one of you or two of you to now come volunteer and tell me the answer. Yes, please. Name, your name?
My name is Sri Abhiram.
Sri Abhiram, tell me.
Because women are good at multitasking.
Very good, man. Come here, man. Come here. Oh. Tell again.
I think the first brain belongs to women because women are good at multitasking.
And so? Continue. Very good. I think I will give you the honor of changing the slide. This slide, just move it. Next one. Next one. Now look what Abhiram. Now what Abhiram did is, you're in 11th standard, 12th standard? 11th standard. See, what Abhiram did is a very simple extrapolation from what I mentioned. I told that people are specialized in tasks. And I gave you this slide to show the crisscrossing of the neural circuitry. He thought 2 steps more and told, look, maybe this crisscrossing is now trying to crisscross different lateral activities that our brains are supposed to have, and that may be responsible for the multitasking that women are good at and not men. Which is, I would say, a fantastic sort of extrapolation which anyone who wants to work in science needs to have. Can you move the next slide? One more. And that explains where a woman could do a dozen jobs: history, taking care of the child, cooking, doing that, all at one time. And her brain is sort of acting in the left and right hemisphere in some coordinated manner. Ask a man to do that, he will put this child into this pan. Right? Absolutely. So let's give a big applause to This is one story. Okay. Let me now give you another story. And these stories are not related at all. You may have a lot of questions. If you have questions, you can now note down. You can ask me towards the end of the talk, or if you want, right now. But all these examples are pointing to one small common take home. I'll come to that. Let me take the second example. What is this? Cigarette butts. Now why should I bring in a DST inspired camp something as abominable as cigarette butts? But let me now tell you that if you go to parts of any town, city, in bus stands, in shops, in so many places, you will find these cigarette butts. All of us have observed it, isn't it? Yes or no? After observing, we may have simply gone by. We may not have given any attention to that, right or not? But look at what this bird does. This bird looks at the cigarette butt and tells to itself, shall I take it or not? And this bird is very shy, like many of you people. It says, no, I'm not going to take. Whereas there's another bird like Abhiram, who is more courageous. Now this bird comes and says, well, let me try. And so it takes the cigarette butt in its beak and then question, what does the bird do with the cigarette butt? Next. Question. Any of you can answer. Try to attempt to answer that. Please remember, in science, the exercise of answering the question, not whether you answer it right or wrong, is important, isn't it? You can try. So what do you think this bird will do after taking the cigarette butt in its beak? Huh? Sorry? Come here, man. Come here. What's your name? Huh? Tirupati. is a follower of Modi. Tirupati, it's okay, it's on. Put it on. The answer that he gave was, repeat please so that others can listen.
That throws to the garbage.
So, this bird will take the butt and throw it in the garbage. Probably this bird has listened to Swachh Bharat program of Odisha. Very good try, no problem. Sit down, Tirupati. Very good, we should applaud for him. See children, I would like to mention this one. This is what is important. Not whether he told a correct answer or not. He took the courage to think and tell something. That is important in science. If you simply keep quiet, you are not going to be a good scientist. I can tell you right today. If you want to be a good scientist, you should be courageous to speak your mind out, no matter what is the thought, whether it's right, wrong, don't care. That is the first step in actually getting across to get the answer. Unfortunately, okay. Yeah, please. Your name? Manish, tell me.
Analyze whether it is an eatable.
Analyze. Very good. Excellent. Sit down. Clap for him. The second answer is, it is now picking up and asking whether it is an eatable or not. If it's eatable, it will eat. Okay. Very good. Your name?
My name is Pani and it tries to build nest with it.
Come here, ma'am. What's your name?
Palani Arami.
Please take this and move the slide. Look at that. I can give the answer. Just like Adhiram did, just like Tirupati did, just like Manish did, this girl thought 2 times more than most of us and gave a hypothetical answer. You didn't know it was correct. So she thought and saying, oh my God, maybe it's going to use this cigarette butt to line its nest. Okay, very good. Now, can we ask one more question? What and why, or why and what? You can use the question differently. Why is the bird doing this?
So because it will analyze whether it is eatable or not.
Which is done. It's not eatable.
So it will take, it will assume that it is a twig or something. So it will take it
To
build its nest.
But why only cigarette butts? Because twigs are also there, no? Cigarette butts are spongy. What's your name? Vignesh. Okay, cigarette butts are spongy. Maybe you're right. Any other answer? Is easily liftable. Your name? Arvind. Easily liftable. Any other answer?
It may contain the work of content.
Huh?
It may contain the work of content.
Yes.
So maybe microorganisms will.
Hey, come here, man. Come here. What's your name? Shivaramakrishnan. Shivaramakrishnan has added answer to Palani Anandi. She told it's going to put it into the nest. She is right. Now the second question we asked, so what it will do after putting into the nest, Shivaramakrishnan told, this cigarette butt contains nicotine. Nicotine is a chemical, it's an alkaloid. Now he says that this nicotine may
Keep out the
microorganism in the young birds, that is fledglings that are there in the nest. Can you give this remote to him? And can you operate this button? Now, what this graph shows is that this x-axis is the number of cigarette butts in the nest. Y-axis is the ectoparasite. Ectoparasite means ticks, mites and all that. And if you have a picture here, this is the young one. When the birds are young, they are not having much of this plumage. The skin is naked. This is not drawn to scale. This ectoparasite goes and sucks the blood of these fledglings, and most often what happens when it sucks the blood, this fledgling is going to die. So what you see is, when you don't have any cigarette butt in the nest, the number of ectoparasite in the young ones are very high. When you have lot of cigarette butts in the nest, there is no ectoparasite. And so it appears somehow, don't ask me the question how, birds know that if I pack cigarette butts in my nest, my young ones are going to be safe. Fantastic. I think we should applaud both of them. The moral of the story is not over. If you go back home and if you have bedbugs, ticks, mites, one of the ways by which you can get rid of that is ask money from your father. A teacher told that if I put cigarette butts in the bed, I can be free, so he'll give you a belly kick. Isn't it? But that's a more jokeless sort of take home. Okay, there could be more questions, we'll leave it at that. The purpose of some of these examples is to now provoke you to think. Like already I am successful in making 5 or 6 people think about the answers. So you may have more questions, we'll come to that later. The third example is to do with a picture that I put here. Goddess Saraswati. And Goddess Saraswati is sitting on this, what is this flower? Lotus flowers. And all of us must have seen lotus plants, correct? Isn't it? What have you paid concentration to when you have seen a lotus plant?
White.
Huh?
White petals.
White color petals. Then what else have you observed in a lotus plant? Protein. Then anything else? Water? What is your name? Arnika. Water will, can you tell loudly so that others can listen?
Water will not stand still in leaf.
Water will not stand in the leaf. Many of you have seen this one, isn't it? Water will not stand on the leaf. Arnika, I'll ask you to come here in a minute. Sit down. Keep the mic with you. What she told is perfectly correct. That is, water will not stand on the leaves of a lotus. That is, on the leaves, the water will not stand. Isn't it? All of you made this observation? Now, the question is, how do these plants maintain the leaves so clean? That is, water will not stand. Because it does not stand, anything that is there in the leaf is taken away. So much so that it is said, the purest, the cleanest surface on earth, natural surface, is a lotus leaf. So we all go to marriages. When we go to marriages, we are offered food on what leaf? Banana leaf. What do you do with the banana leaf before eating? You sprinkle water, clean it, because the leaf will normally be dirty. If you are offered food on a lotus leaf, you don't have to clean, because you can't clean it any more than what it is already. It's so clean. Okay? The question is, how do lotus keep their leaves as clean as what you see? And you told partly the answer. The answer is that water does not stay. So when water does not stay, it simply is going to take away the dirt along with it. Correct? But there are lots of other plants who also do the same thing, but they are not clean as a lotus leaf. Take banana plant. Water doesn't hold on to a banana leaf, but yet the banana leaf is dirty. So what could be the answer? Anyone?
Sir, the leaf may contain wax layer.
Leaf may contain wax layer. Name?
Amalan.
Amalan. wax layer. But many other plants also contain wax, isn't it? How do you know whether a plant contains wax or not? Can anyone tell me? How do you tell whether a plant leaf contains wax or not?
If you put a drop of water, it will run away, not stand.
It will run, but let's say I put a drop of water here, it will run away. Does it contain wax?
In leaves,
No. So that's not a complete answer, isn't it? Isn't it? So how do you know that the leaf contains wax? You will have a chemistry class, someone may talk about, if you put the leaf into chloroform, the wax will melt off and you can actually see the wax in the chloroform. So that's one way of looking at wax in the leaf. But as I told Amalan, lots of plants contain wax. They are called epicuticular wax. They are on the leaf cuticle. But that is not the reason why this lotus leaf does not allow water to stay. Okay, so this question became very interesting for this gentleman whose name is Professor Barthelot, who is in Germany in a university called University of Bonn. He was asking this question and asked, why is this, or how do the lotus leaf manage to keep their leaves so green as they are? So what he did is, he also went through all this hypothesis that we are just now making, that they may contain wax and so on and so forth. That the leaves would be very smooth and so on and so forth. But no, look at this photograph. What Barthelot did is, he took a small section of the leaf of the lotus and subjected it to what is called as a scanning electron micrograph. You know, there is simple microscopy, compound microscopy, you have transmission electron microscopy, scanning electron microscopy. This scanning electron microscopy, what it does is, it scans the surface features of any material and magnifies it tremendously, and what you can't see in the naked eye, you can see through this scanning electron microscope. And what it shows you when you take the photograph of a section of this small leaf is that the leaf of lotus is not smooth at all. Okay? It's not smooth at all. What it shows you is, it has got these small perturbations, I would say like hills and valleys, hills and valleys, hills and valleys. And so, these are not going to be something that we intuitively, what I'm saying intuitively means by common sense. Can we expect the surface to roll off water or to stagnate water? It will, you expect water, if you know throw water, the water will collect in puddles here, isn't it? This is called counterintuitive. We expect the surface to be smooth, but what we found in the scanning electron micrograph, SEM photograph is that the surface is all full of potholes, just like this. Correct? And in the potholes of the leaf of lotus, you expect water to stay like puddles. It is not happening. So let us look at this small simulation, where what Barthelot did is, first look at this figure. What he did is, you can take any leaf from a plant that's outside, incline it to about 25 degrees angle to the horizontal surface, and on the top of the leaf, you can put this material, which can be like dirt material, even colored chalk powder or bits of paper, and then with the ink filler, take a drop of ink and then put it down there, and what you see is you will have the blob coming down. Let's look at this picture now. This picture is for any plant outside. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. This is a leaf of any plant outside. Look at what happens to this drop. It loses the sphericity, and as it comes down, it fails to take the dirt material down. This is a lotus leaf done the same way, but as the drop comes down, the drop remains spherical, and as it comes down, it takes away the dirt material. Now that is enabled by this surface property. What this surface property has done effectively is, you know about surface tension now? If you have water in this bottle, what are the forces that are acting on the water molecules in this bottle? Huh? No. This water bottle, this water that you have, this water, inside this volume of water, there are two forces that operate on this water molecule. One is the cohesive force. What is the cohesive force? Huh? What is the cohesive force? Binding of one water molecule with the other. So one molecule of the water will bind to the other molecule. What is the formula of water? H2O. Hydrogen and oxygen. Which is positive and which is negative? Negative. Now if you have another water molecule here, what will happen? The hydrogen and oxygen will bind, and again if you have another molecule, and the same thing will repeat, and you have a huge surface of cohesive forces acting on water molecule, one molecule to the other. But what happens to the water that is on the inner side of this bottle? It is touching the bottle, no? That water molecule is being adhered to the inner surface of this bottle by a force called adhesive force. Very good. Suppose you knock off the adhesive force, you remove the adhesive force completely. What will happen to the water in this bottle? Will it stick to the walls of the bottle? No. This water will float in the bottle like a blob of mercury. You follow what I am saying? It will not stick to the inner walls of the bottle. In the case of our lotus leaf, this surface of our lotus leaf, what it has done is it has reduced the surface tension, and you get an angle made by a sphere of water greater than 150 degrees. That means any water molecule or any surface that allows a water molecule, a water blob, not molecule, sorry, a water blob, to have an angle greater than 150 degrees, theta greater than 150 degrees, that surface is called super hydrophobic surface. Super hydrophobic means hydrophobic. It does not allow water to stay. It does not allow water to stick. And this is the most unique super hydrophobic surface in nature. You follow what I am saying? So, now what happened? When Professor Bartlett discovered this one, are you all excited about this discovery? Bartlett was also excited. And he told, oh my God, what a discovery I have made. That a lotus leaf is super hydrophobic, and so it may have so much applications in human welfare, in medicine and agriculture and whatnot. So he wanted to patent this idea. All of you have heard of patent? Well, you know what is patent? Patent means copyright. Something like copyright, not exactly like copyright. So if I discover something, I patent it. I publish the patent. If anyone wants to now get my idea, he will have to pay me to get the idea from me. That is called patent. So he decided to patent this discovery of this phenomena, which he called as lotus effect. And he went to his vice chancellor and told, sir, I think I have made a very important discovery. Can you please help me patent this discovery? Children, to patent means a lot of money. you need to have a lot of money, just like buying a license. And this is huge amount of money. His vice chancellor told, oh come on, this is not such an important discovery that I can waste the university money on this patent. And so he sort of rejected his request. But Bartlett went back, and this again is important in science and scientists, that you have to be convinced of your own discovery before you can convince another person of the discovery. So Professor Bartlett went home, disappointed, but he thought, look, I think this is a very important discovery. So let me do one thing. Let me now get some money on my own, not from the university, and then patent this discovery myself on my name and not on the university's name. So he went home, like every married person, a married person or husband, when he does not have money, when he goes home, what does he do? To whom does he ask? He asks his wife. He asks his wife, honey, can I get some money? Honey, can I get some money? And when his wife came to know that this is the story, the wife decided to now get him money. And where does the wife get the money from? From her father, mother. Correct? And so money was given to Bartlett, and he patented this on his own name. 1 year over, 2 years over, third year his wife started asking, you took so much money, saying this will happen, that will happen and all that. What? Nothing happened. Where is my money? I have to pay my father, mother. So fourth year, what happened? A company in Germany bought his technology. In Europe, they don't paint the wall. They have this wallpaper. In 2-3 years time, the wallpaper gets dirty, like this one. And each year, of 2 or 3 years later, you have to rip the wallpaper out and then put another paper. So what this company thought is, if I can mimic the surface of this wallpaper using the lotus surface topography, which you saw, I need to just throw water on the wallpaper, and the water, when it comes down, just as you saw in the lotus leaf, it will now take all the strip of dust completely away, and our lotus leaf will be very, very clean. The wallpaper will be very clean. So his first patent was bought. His patent was first bought by a wallpaper company. Next, his patent was bought by this car company, Mercedes-Benz. Now Mercedes-Benz decided the car's windshield is there now, main windshield. It will now have the lotus surface on it. So when it rains or when you throw water, all the dirt material is going to be washed down. Very nice. With these two companies buying his patent, overnight Bartlett became very, very rich. He is a billionaire today, and he still works in the botanical garden of the University of Bonn as the curator of the Bonn Botanical Museum and Garden. After his discovery, I would like to show this small slide or movie. Many companies have started what is called as ultra dry companies, which are basing the technology completely on what was available in the lotus leaf. Let me show you this one clip. I hope you enjoy that. How many of you have actually done this? May not be today, but sometime in the many of us. I can raise my hand. Yes or no? I want all of you to answer this question. How many of you have done this in your house? Madam, you are not done? Actually, you know, I'm also the same middle class person like all of us here. Sometimes at home, when the toothpaste is nearly done and we want to squeeze out, what we do is, you know, that roti making thing. We do like this for the last some drop of the toothpaste to come out. Yes or no? In Europe, in America, when you buy a toothpaste, you also get this one, which now helps you get the toothpaste out. So it's a very difficult thing. I would like to introduce this person. His name is Kripa Varanasi. He is from Boston. He is an Indian by name, of course. He is at one of the most famous universities in America called MIT. Some of you would have heard of that. Massachusetts Institute of Technology. 3 years back, he was voted as one of the top 20 technologists in the MIT technology review 3 years back. You can Google him and see. All that he has done. He is a mechanical engineer, actually a hydraulic engineer, whose work is trying to see how he can reduce the resistances of flow of liquids in pipes. That's his major field of work. So Varanasi learnt about the slide or the talk that I gave just 5 minutes back of Professor Bartlett and the lotus leaf. And what he did is he has improved that, and today he and his PhD student have done something wonderful where, as I told you, they have now reduced the adhesive forces on the inner volume of any container. And so if you want to now get the toothpaste out or the sauce out or the jam out, it's very easy because you don't have any sort of resistance to flow of this whatever is contained in the bottles. Okay. You may have again lots of questions, but I'm going to summarize some part of the talk now here. What is common to these few examples I told you this morning? We saw the example of car parking, lotus, and then cigarette butts. Where your thinking had now? What is a common thread in all of these stories that I told you just now? Look, all of us have made this observation, or many of us, correct or not, that water does not stay on lotus leaf, that lotus leaves are always clean, correct or not? Second, all of us have seen cigarette butts in petty shops and bus stops and whatnot, isn't it? Yes or no? All of us have seen some cars parked wrongly by a lady or by a man, or a man burning the food, not cooking it properly. All this is the domain of what I would call as observation. Yes or no? All these discoveries, if you go back and back and back to the origins of these discoveries, you will find the origin of the discoveries lie with one important thing common to all this discovery, that the proponent, the author of the discovery, has made a very significant observation. We all make observation. I see you, you see me. Correct or not? We all see each other. We all see the plants, we all see the birds, we all see the flowers, we see everything. Is that observation? It is observation, but in observation there are two parts to the observation. One is walking, seeing like this and walking away. That is one observation. Second observation is what? Method of observation. You observe, but then you also stay for a minute and ask, oh, what a wonderful embroidery this girl has got on her dress. And ask, your mind starts working on that. So this observation can be split into an observation which is passive versus an observation that is active. Scientists, unlike laymen, they make active observations. When you make an active observation, you know what? It leads to automatically in the minds of the person making the observation a very important second common thing for all those stories that I told you this morning. When you make an active observation, what is the second thing that you sort of ask in your mind? Very good, man. What's your name? Erin Winton. Very good. For example, this girl, if you don't mind, what's your name? Aparna. Aparna, please sit down. Aparna is not in uniform. Maybe all these others are in uniform. So it's striking me as something odd that she is not in uniform. Maybe it's your birthday today. Probably. So my mind is thinking. So when mind is thinking of an observation, I ask the question, why? Correct? Or how? Or some question thereabouts of the observation. Followed? If I now keep persisting with the question and interrogate Aparna, why she is not in uniform, why she is wearing this dress and so on and so forth, I may lead up to new knowledge. Followed? All science, from Darwin to Newton to Rutherford, to name any scientist who has made any discovery, you go back to the history of that discovery, you will find that the beginning of the discovery was an observation that was active. Because the observation was actively made by the scientist, there was a question to be asked, why and how, and many other questions. And then, if you answer the question, you can create new knowledge. See, doing science is very simple, no? Yes or no? Any field, physics, chemistry, biology, whatever field, astronomy, everything finally rests on an observation. And then making an active question on that observation, and then leading, if you are interested, to research on that to generate new knowledge. And that's how new knowledge is created. I will pause here for a minute and ask these few questions of you. How many of us here have ever wondered about anything, assuming that we have made observations? A, we will spend 5 full minutes on this question. B, paused and thought about it. And C, actually did something about addressing that wonder. Think about this. We have lots of time now. You follow what I am saying? Anything, even if it's the most simplest thing, please share it with all of us so that we can now participate in this exercise of these 3 cardinal rules or principles or common denominators of doing science and good science. Observation, asking questions, and then leading up to new knowledge. Anyone? Now is the time to take a break. Not go out. Can you do one thing? By the way, I am asking this question to you. Let's not get distracted. Think about the question. I am asking, have you wondered about anything? Sivaramakrishnan. Okay. You have wondered about phototropism. Have you then paused and got why phototropism, how phototropism, and all that? No. Please, no problem. He has given one example. I want 2, 3, 4 examples from all of you. Come on. Name?
My name is Kritik.
Kritik, tell me.
I have wondered how the Spider-Man websuit works.
How the Spider-Man websuit works. Very good. Very good, excellent. So you wondered about something and you are thinking about it, but you have not actually done something about it. Correct?
This art.
Very good, very good. I'm not saying you should get an answer for that. Kritik, very good. Anyone else? Give the name and...
Maybe Srinivasan.
Ah.
I wondered about black holes.
You have wondered about black holes. Very good. About black holes. Then who discovered black holes? Stephen Hawking. Indian contribution to black holes. Subramanian Chandrasekhar. Very good. Okay, very good. So you wondered. Very good, excellent. Anyone else? Please, I want you to share. No, give the mic then.
Parallel universes.
Parallel universe. You wondered about parallel universe, what it is, how it works, whether it's true or not. Fantastic. Some more examples. Mike, some more examples. Name.
My name is Aditya. I have wondered about creating gravity in space, like centrifugal satellites which could help us to move from one universe to another universe or from planet to planet.
Fantastic. Very good Aditya. So much. You guys are really great. Any more examples? Name?
Myself Sanjana. I have wondered about the leaf which has both a color like a pink and green.
Okay.
Why that pigment is present like that?
Okay, very good. Excellent. Then anyone else? Some 2, 3 more please. See, all these guys were silent all this time. Suddenly they woke up. Anyone?
Anthony. May my question be silly?
No, never assume that your question is silly.
Why the trees grow somewhat kilometers like high? Why the trees grow somewhat very higher, very bigger? Why it should grow and for what? That's my question.
Okay, very good. Next please, anyone else? Anyone this side? One question. Agira.
I wonder why some people eat so much but they never get fat.
Not me, no? Good. Anyone else?
Why did take Mars instead of Venus, which has the same as the
Repeat again.
Why people try taking Mars instead of Venus?
Instead of Venus. I have no answer. Anyway. Okay. 1 or 2 more questions. Good. Anyone good?
So, why the planets are revolving around the sun other than the moon?
Why does the planet?
Revolving around the sun other than
Fine. One more. Yeah.
Sir, I wondered how the leaves of Kashmir are rather blind. When we touched it, the whole folding sleeve.
Very good. Excellent. Okay. Now, here is one question, madam. Manish, no?
Human brains of its capacity and the capacity of thought to control the universe at quantum level, sir.
Okay.
Electron barrier experiment.
Very good. Very big question you asked. Fantastic. So you wondered about it. Very good. Excellent. So, anyone else wants to say anything? Name please.
How air is produced?
Oh, management. My God. Very good, very good. No, no, excellent. Now, okay. Can we now relax now? Wow. What's your name?
Akshaya.
Akshaya, tell me.
I wondered about the evolution of species.
Evolution of?
Species.
Space. Huh? Species. Okay. Then you should ask Uncle Darwin about it. But anyway. Okay. Fine. Over? I think. Any more questions?
Sir, I wondered how such small missiles cause very large destructions like nuclear bombs.
Okay. Fine. Good. Okay. So, I brought this leaf assuming that you are not having this gene in you. The gene of wondering about anything. But from the small experience I brought here, I think if I push hard, every one of you sitting here will have one question that you have wondered about. Yes or no? Correct? And that is the reason why you are here. That you already are trained in wondering about something. It can be anything. From physics, from quantum physics, someone talked about from species and this and that. A whole battery of things are there. I don't think I would like to give this leaf, but eating this leaf makes you think, I'm told. Okay? And it takes you to outer space in terms of your mind, thought processes. It's not hallucinating. It's simply a joke that I'm playing. We won't take this now that you have asked all this question. But what I wanted to now tell you is that, look, any of those questions, those last row of boys asked me, look here, I'm not a physicist by the way, but even a very accomplished physicist who I know, many of them, will have trouble asking or addressing or answering those questions. And many of the questions actually, what you have raised is difficult to answer. But in science, that's the most important thing. What is the most important thing? Asking the question. Now let's see. I'll give this example of a student. Some physicists sitting here, or students who like physics, will like this example for two reasons. I'll come to that. Now, how many of you have seen millipedes? Many of us. Yes or no? Right or no? Huh? Rainy season, you will see millipedes. Now, I want one volunteer who has not touched a millipede so far. Is there someone who has not touched a millipede so far? Come here. What's your name?
Jering.
Huh?
Jering.
Jering?
Jering.
Spell it?
Jering. J-E-R-A-N.
J-E-R-A-N-E. Jering. You have not touched a millipede so far. Why? You're scared. Okay, now you have an opportunity to touch a millipede. I have it in my pocket. Can you go there, Jerry? Can you go there? And when I tell you to touch, you should touch the head of this millipede. And see, look here. You should now give it a dab with the mic or whatever with your hand. Now, when I say do that, you do that. Go there. And only the head you should touch. No, when I tell you. And you should poke at the screen. Now, do it. See? What happened? What happened? Sorry. Happy that you touched the millipede? Now, please take your seat. Now this example This is a real example I'm giving you, is not rocket science. Okay, it's a millipede science. And I had a student of the same age that you are all sitting, 11th standard student in Bangalore. I teach in that place, in a place called Nehru Planetarium. Incidentally, this college is Nehru College. There we have a planetarium called Nehru Planetarium. Every summer, this part of the year, I teach children like all of you. And there was this boy called Nagendra, and whose photo is here, this guy, and who's now grown up. This is 15 years back. And he is a student, so he graduated recently from Boston University, in Boston, of course. And the title of his thesis is Statistical Physics of Cascading Failures in Complex Networks. The title itself is so complex. Okay. It's another matter that I know his major guide, because I also was in Boston. I've heard a lecture by his guide, a very renowned physicist. But after he finished the project with me, I'll come to the project, I lost touch with him, like, you know, we lose touch with lots of students. 15 years later, he sends me his thesis recently, and he said, "Sir, please look at the sort of acknowledgement in my thesis." And what he has written is, as a high school research fellow in your age, he worked with me from August 2002 to May 2003. 1 year he was in my lab. And he studied connection between death feigning behavior in Mimosa pudica. You asked me, touch me not lady, millipede and beetles, studied the time for rejuvenation from such behavior using some statistics and proved the randomness in waking up times. Now, what he did with this millipede in the lab was that he asked a very simple question. I never even thought of that. The question he asked is, first of all, he asked me, "Sir, why should millipede get coiled?" Okay? Is it an interesting question or not? Yes. So why should millipede get coiled? Huh? To protect itself. Next question he asked me, how will it protect me? By, you know, closing itself and staying immobile. And when it's immobile, the predator that might come to eat it thinks it is dead, and so it is not going to pick it up. But the question he asked me was, "Sir, how long should it remain coiled?" You follow what I'm saying? He asked a second order question of how long should it remain coiled. So, Tirupati, come here. Since I know your name, I'm calling you. Let's say Tirupati is our millipede. And Shiva Ramakrishnan, you are the predator. Come here. And look here, when a predator like Shiva Ramakrishnan comes to catch Tirupati, one of the ways by which Tirupati can escape this predator is by feigning that he is dead, just by coiling. So Shiva Ramakrishnan tried to touch Tirupati, and at that time you should close your eyes. Yeah. So you touch again, close your eyes, keep closing. So this is the meaning. Close, don't open till I tell you to open. Close your eyes. So this is a millipede, and he is closed his eyes. Shiva Ramakrishna is a predator. This predator will keep looking at this prey, and when it opens its eyes again, it's going to grab him. Now let us say, let us say, once Shiva Ramakrishna, the predator, touches Tirupati, the millipede, he opens his eyes after exactly, let's say, 30 seconds. Repeatedly, what will happen? The predator will now learn it, isn't it? And so it will wait for 30 seconds, open your eyes, and catch him. And then he will eat. Whereas if the millipede opens her eyes at random time intervals, the predator is never going to learn. And so it will go away after waiting for a few seconds. After that, Tirupati is going to go back safe and sound. Correct? Now, thank you. So what Nagendra did in my lab, he wanted to study the physics of this waking up. And for the first time in the world, what he did was, he showed, using some statistics, which I won't go into, he answered this question, how long should the millipede remain coiled? And he showed that when I touch a millipede, in the millipede's body, a random clock is set. And that random clock will give alarm. The millipede does not know when the alarm will set off. It can be after 2 seconds, it can be after 2 minutes. And when that alarm gets off, the millipede wakes up and goes. This way, the millipede continuously and consistently keeps the predator guessing, and so the predator never is able to learn when the millipede is going to get up. And this he published as a 11th standard student. Actually, in his 12th standard, he published this work, and this he has now attributed to in his PhD thesis that he submitted few months back. Okay, so what I want to now summarize is, it's very, very important as students of science to ask this question of why. The girl there asked me, why do planets move around? Isn't it? Someone here asked. There are so many people who asked why of this, why of that, and all this stuff. It's so important to ask why of anything. Only then you become empowered in making discoveries. Now, I had a student, I like to relate a story. How many of you asked why in your classroom with your teachers? Of so many questions that you have had. You have asked? Okay. But generally, would you ask why? If a teacher is telling something, for example, I have this anecdote to tell you. The question of why is very difficult to answer, isn't it? You can answer, when did Tipu Sultan die? When did he die? When this happened? When that happened? When does the monsoon arrive? And so on and so forth. But if you ask the question, why should the monsoon come? It looks stupid, isn't it? But there's an answer for that. So the story goes like this. I had a student who was doing his MSc with me, and one day he came to me with a problem. And the problem was, he told me, sir, and what he told I am telling you, each day after the college he will go home. From the college he will take the bus and then get down in some part of Bangalore. From there he has to walk 2 furlongs to his house through a narrow road in the evening at about 5 o'clock. At that time, children would be playing cricket. Boys would be playing cricket. And so one boy, let's say like Shiva Ramakrishnan or Manish or one of those boys, he came up to this boy, my student Arun, and asked this Arun one question. Arun, please tell me, why does the earth move around the sun? Okay? That's a simple question. Why does the earth move around the sun? Arun told some answer. Next day, when he had to go home again in the evening, the same boy came to Arun and told, Arun, I thought of the answer that you gave. I don't think it is correct. I don't think it is satisfactory. Can you please tell me why does the earth move around the sun? Arun gave some answer. Third day, the same thing repeated. Fourth day, this fellow comes to me. Sir, this is a problem. Can you please tell me, why does the earth move around the sun? I told him, look, it's very simple. And many times we teachers pretend to know everything in this earth. So I'm not a teacher of physics or astronomy. I'm a teacher of biology. I told it's very simple. Come, I'll tell you the answer. I told him the answer. And then he went. 10-15 days, I did not meet him. He didn't come to see me. 15th day probably, when I was in the canteen, I saw this guy sitting and having coffee. I went up to this fellow and asked him, hey Arun, what the hell happened? Has your problem been solved? He told, yes sir, he was smiling. Yes sir, I got the problem solved. I was so happy, I was so proud that my fingers almost went to my collar and said, oh, my explanation worked. He told, no sir. Then I told, what happened? How did you solve your problem? I changed the route to my house, sir. He changed the route to his house to avoid the question by the small guy. And the question of why is so important, therefore, in science, that you have to persist with the question, and one day or the other you will be successful in answering the question. I'll skip this example and just give you one more example. How many of you like basmati rice? It's just a question of observation. Lot of you like basmati rice now? Yes. All of us like basmati rice because of its smell, isn't it? Yes or no? When your mother makes biryani out of basmati rice, the smell is overpowering. You would like to go and eat that basmati rice. How many of you been near a zoo? Near a tiger's sort of den? Some of you may have gone. Yes. And the third question is, how many of you have paid attention when you are near the tiger, when the tiger is urinating? None of you. Obviously. But the next time you go, please pay attention to the tiger when it is urinating. And you will find the smell of the urine to be exactly like basmati rice. You will wonder whether the tiger is eating basmati rice, and when did the tiger become a vegetarian tiger? Okay. The smell is exactly the same as cooked basmati rice coming from the tiger. Now this was an observation made. Remember, observation, asking question, new knowledge. And these three mantra was put together. Observation. How come this basmati rice and tiger urine are smelling the same? So many people have observed, but they have not asked the question. But this man asked the question, and he found that indeed it is the same compound that, I don't have the structure of the compound. It's a compound called 2-acetyl pyroline. It's the same compound that is present in the urine of a tiger and in the basmati rice that gives you the smell is the same compound. And this paper was published in a very famous journal called Nature. And why that tiger should produce the same compound is for the purpose of maintaining territoriality. Like what you saw in the previous slide, every tiger when it urinates, put the urine in some bush or something to tell the other tiger, look, I am here, don't come inside. So that's a sort of territorial mark. We don't know, however, why basmati rice should have that. And that's an open question for anyone to know, research. So there are many of these questions lurking around. Okay. So, finally, what I would like to summarize is, to observe and wonder is to discover. If you have not done that, you don't become scientist. Recurrent examples that I've given you are all coming from those. Okay. I will now turn my attention to one last thing I wanted to tell you. We have still some time. Meanwhile, would you like this leaf experiment? So can I request one volunteer here to give leaves? Maybe I don't have enough for all of them, but as many as you can. Just one leaf or half a leaf is enough. You can take, distribute please. Eat it, chew it and eat it, and see what happens. 15 minutes, your attention please. The next 10-15 minutes, I want to take you through a slightly different route, but finally converging onto the main storyline that I started talking. I would like to have your attention here. So, the leaf is just harmless. You can take the leaf. Please eat the leaf. And it's perfectly safe. And it's a simple experiment to now demonstrate to you again whatever we have been talking about. Okay. How many of you, this is a question again. How many of you think you are capable of doing research right now? Okay, where is my pointer? How many of you? How many of you think you are capable of doing research right now? Which, that is, right now means? Right now in the sense, when you are still in your 11th standard, you don't have to go to college to do research, you don't have to do some extra thing in your life. Attention there. Okay. 1 minute. Let's quieten down. The sleep has caused some disturbance in the audience. Okay, so let me ask this question again. Please pay attention here. The question here is, I'm asking, how many of you think you can do research right now without any further education, without going to 12th and not doing degrees and all that? How many of you think you cannot? How many of you think, no, I'm not sure, I don't know whether I can do research or not? So can we raise hands for this can do? You understand what I'm asking? So, very good. So, all those who have raised their hands are saying, it's very important and very nice. They are saying that at the moment they are here now, they think they can do research, which is a very heartening thing to know. Can you please come and let me know why you think you can do research now? Announce your name and address audience. Come here.
My name is Harish.
Harish, tell them why you think you can do research now.
We come to the camp.
Using the camp you mean? Okay. But forget the camp, even before that. Yeah.
Writing research, we can know more things.
Okay, fine. Sit down, Harish. Anyone else? Come. I want you to tell why you think you can do research now.
What I think actually research means, like, you don't need all the advanced technology to do research. You can do, like, normally you take observations, write it down and find something, or you can browse the net and take more information and do things like that.
What's your name? Fantastic, man. Fantastic. What he gave just now is fantastic. Anyone else wants to say why he or she thinks they can do research now? That is, with whatever preparedness they have got now. Anyone else? One more from girls. You raise the hand? Come. Fantastic. Excellent. I have not seen such a excellent set of students earlier. Beautiful. Name and tell us why. That is all.
My name is Jayanandini. Doing research does not need any extraordinary knowledge or something else. It needs only a confidence in them. If they have confidence up to their knowledge, they can do something. even why the leaves fall down, if we started to research, we will get new things. So what we learn is enough, and only the confidence helps you to go furthermore. So they needs to get some entertainment, enjoyment, enlightenment, or something else to discover new things.
Fantastic. Let's give a great round of applause. There you go. These two, I'll tell you, I think it's mind-blowing in terms of their confidence level. I certainly can tell you in a public platform, I did not have the confidence that she and Vignesh expressed here. When I was in your age, you are really smarter, much smarter than whatever I expected. Thank you very much. Great. Let's give applause to them. And of course, I'm not going to asking cannot and not sure, but for those who still think that they cannot and not sure, I think the answer she has given. The answer is rested on the fact that both of them told that you don't need any extraordinary preparations to do great science. It's a matter of the mind. If you can conquer your mind, you are enough of a researcher. All the other things are extra fitting, lab, this and that. And so, when I give talks, I ask this question, and many students come up and say, no sir, to do research, I need access to facilities, I need access to laboratories, I need money, I need specialized training, you have to send me to Switzerland and so on and so forth. It's all fine. But even without any of those things, we can do marvelous science. It's only within us how much we open up, how much of our eyes and mind we open up to conquer the secrets that nature has held, whether it is in the area of space science or biology or mathematics and so on and so forth. Let's take one example. I had this graph, at the face of it looks like a stupid graph to be put. What is this graph? This graph has an x-axis which is saying days of a week, and y-axis is temperature. And what it simply is asking you is, if I now work out all Sundays, Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Saturdays of the week, submitted over the weeks of a month, of any month randomly taken, and if I plot the average minimum or average maximum temperatures of those days of a week, what will be the graph like? Question clear? What is this month? July. So July is just 2 days back. If I went to the month of July, how many Sundays are there in July? 4, Monday 4, and so on and so forth. I now take the minimum or maximum, not both. I take the maximum temperature of all Sundays of July and get the average. Take the average maximum temperatures of all Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and then I plot that. What will be the nature of plot you get? It will be random. Anything else?
It can be linear. It can be linear.
Linear in what sense? Linear can be this way, it can be this way, it can be this way.
No, it can be constant, or it can be like going increasing.
Okay. So there are possibilities, correct? But before any of those possibilities are asked, why would anyone ask this question in the first place? You follow what I am saying? Why would anyone want to plot the temperature profile, average temperature profile of days of a week, knowing that the sun does not know from a Sunday to a Monday or a Saturday? It's our calendar making. Does the sun know whether it's a Monday or Wednesday or Thursday today? So on an average what your answers are is going to be How it was going to be? It may be linear, one answer. It may be linear that way, possibly. Yes or no? Yes or no? It could be that way. No, no. Well, what is no and what is yes in science is something that will come later. In first instance, science is about the world of possibilities. I am now putting the world of possibilities. One of the world of possibilities is, or was that. The second possibility for simple reason is that it is monotonically increasing linearly that way. Another possibility is, correct? Yet another possibility is that. Now, I was here some time back in Tirchi, and many of you have gone to this temple, okay? And I decided to do this myself and see, look, when in doubt, do it in science. I was listening to a Nobel lecture by a Nobel laureate in Bangalore some years back. He was demonstrating the power of minus temperatures, especially of liquid nitrogen temperatures. A student asked this Nobel laureate, Professor William Phillips, what happens? He told, I don't know, but shall we do that? And so he did that. So with that, I had this question, and let's say I pulled up the calendar of temperatures for the month of March, in this case of 2016, and decided to plot it. This is temperature of Tirchi, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and this is minimum average, and what you see is that there is a pattern like that. The Wednesdays and Thursdays of the week are the hottest. How counterintuitive science can be. You don't have to go by any it is not judgmental. You should open and keep your minds open. Sundays are cool, Saturdays are cool, like weekends normally are cool, no? Weekends are cool because you can go to movie and all that stuff, isn't it? Weekdays you have to study and all that. But look at this more hilariously. In Bangalore, I did this for some time, and again in Bangalore, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays are hottest, weekends are coolest. Can you believe this one? The sun somehow knows I should not shine as hard as I should on Saturday and Sunday because people have worked hard all week long. Let me cool off. You believe me or not? Yes or no? There was a paper in Nature. By the way, Nature, some of you would have heard of this magazine. If you publish in Nature, if I publish a paper in Nature, I am regarded as one elite class among the scientists because it's so difficult to publish in this journal. It's a very, very competitive journal. This paper in Nature had a title called Weekdays Warmer Than Weekends. And they showed this not for Tirchi or Bangalore, but for the entire globe. For some reason, the weekdays are hottest, weekends are coolest. It is not because sun knowing that it is a weekend, it is simply because during the weekdays, our atmosphere gets heated up because of lots of anthropogenic emissions like automobile, industry and so on and so forth, which adds on to the incident radiation of the sun, and therefore 1.5 or 2 degrees temperature is now more during the weekdays compared to the weekends. And so why I mentioned this one is, does this require any access to any great facilities? Yes or no? No. It simply required your mind to think about and give an answer. So I'll skip all of this for want of time. I'll sort of come to one last example to tell you what I have in mind about. Any of you can do research even now as you sit here with one example, which is a hilarious one. Look at this example. Okay. This is an example of two veterinary doctors who were manning a veterinary clinic in New York. And the story is about cats, as this picture shows. And each day in this area in New York, where there are skyscrapers, these two are no more there, as you know, people would have cats as pets, and they will now be in different floors. The owners of the cats will go for their work. And what will the cat do? The cats are curious, isn't it? They will look out of the window, and when they look out and be curious, that fellow will fall off from the window. Let's say it falls from the 11th floor or 20th floor or 40th floor or whatever floor. What happens when it falls off? It breaks his leg, sometimes breaks his head, sometimes breaks his tail, whatever. So the cat will be taken to the veterinary clinic, and there it would be entered. Name of the cat, let's say Pretty. Which floor it fell off? 48th floor. What happened to the cat? Dead. Another cat, Beastly. It fell off from the 100th floor. What happened to the cat? It broke just one leg. And so on and so forth. One day, no cats were reported in the clinic. And these two veterinary doctors, they are getting bored. If it was India, they'll say, let's go and have coffee. But there, what they did, they told, see, we have so much data with us. Can we simply plot the data and find out what happens when cats fall from different floor heights? What percent of the cats actually die? So 10th floor, 20th floor, 30th floor, and so on and so forth. And what's the sort of mortality? Again, a science question. So, for want of time, let us now ask this question. As you increase the floor heights, let's say you got money to buy cats, you bought some 1,000 cats, and you take 100 cats and put them down from the 10th floor. Someone in the bottom looks at how many of them died. Work out the percentage. Out of 100, how many died? You go to the 20th floor, do the same thing. Go to the 100th floor, put another 100 cats down and see how many of the cats died. That's your percent mortality. Correct? What graph will you get? With increasing heights of the floor, what will be the curve? Most likely curve will be this blue line, isn't it? Correct or not? If I have to commit suicide, and if I have an option, I better jump off from the 100th floor. Correct? Then the chances of committing suicide will be accomplished. Yes or no? No one jumps like this. Nothing is going to happen. This is where, in science, the most important thing works is intuition. And always intuition is not right in science. And that's where major discoveries are made. So these guys plotted this one and then asked what's happening. They never asked this hypothetical question. And what is showed is that this fellow, if it jumps off from the smaller heights like the first floor, second floor, 10th floor, 15th and 28th, they don't die. When they jump from the 80th, 90th, 100th floor, also they don't die. But when they jump from the 30th and 40th or 50th floor, they die. So in cats, if they have to commit suicide, they should not choose a 100th floor. They should choose a floor 40th or 50th. Then they die. How counterintuitive it is. When this was found, people asked, what is the reason why they are able to survive? And what happens if you see cats when they fall off, when they jump from a taller height, they somehow bring their vertebral column parallel to the earth's surface and they fall like this on their padded paws. And so they don't allow the strain to hit their vertebral column. And that is possible when they are thrown from a taller height because they have enough time to reorient their body and come flat. But if you throw them at a height at about, say, the 30th or 50th floor, what happens? They don't have time to turn, and by the time they don't have turned, they fall flat and they hit the head or whatever to the cement platform. So, this again tells you, as Vignesh mentioned, you have to use the power of thinking to ask questions and to solve them. You don't need any extra training. You don't need any extra books. You don't need any access to machinery or equipment and so on and so forth. So, what I would like to tell at the end is, to conclude my talk, would be from this gentleman. You all know this gentleman, or heard of him. Okay? He invented the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell. What I also did not know was, besides the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell is known for the following inventions. He invented what we call the kites, the modern day kites. He invented the airplanes. He invented the tetrahedral structure. Tetrahedral structure is which one? Carbon. Diamond. Isn't it? Tetrahedral structure. He invented or developed new methods of sheep breeding. Where is tetrahedral structure and where is sheep breeding? He showed and developed the first desalinization plant in the world. He did the first water distillation. When his son was drowning and died, he found and discovered or invented the ventilator system that we use in hospitals today, that is artificial respiration. So look at the huge variety of things he went on to invent and discover, all through power of simple thinking, observing and putting it into action. Before he died, he told the reporter, I would like you students to keep this in mind. This very powerful sentence. I'll read that for you. What is the sentence? He said, there cannot be mental atrophy. Mental atrophy means rotting. There cannot be mental atrophy in any person who continues to observe, to remember what he observes, and to seek answers for his unceasing hows and whys about things. So the key word in this sentence is observe and ask the questions of how and why. And that's the simple mantra that I've been telling you for the last 1.5 hours. That if you keep observing and asking the questions of whys and hows, you're automatically going to be great thinkers and scientists. And as I conclude my talk and wait for any questions, maybe, madam, this can be distributed to everyone as a gratitude for you sitting patiently and listening to me. So, I am done with my talk.
Suppose we burn lotus leaves, if the wax melts or the leaves become black.
Yeah.
Wax melts or not?
Wax melts, of course. Wax will melt and drip off. Okay. Sure. I just want to mention this. Some of you already had sugar with you, have eaten sugar. So how is the sugar tasting? Good? What happened? I told you to get sugar, you did not get sugar, you got some sand or something? Okay, this is a small trick. The trick I tell because I have to leave now. The leaf that you ate, look at this, the leaf that you ate about half an hour back, what it has done is it has got a compound in that leaf, it's called gymnamic acid, will not bother with the details, technical details. That gymnamic acid goes and binds to the sugar taste receptors on your tongue. Okay? So the taste receptors are blocked in your tongue. And this was observed by someone long ago, we will not talk about that. After that, after you eat this leaf and you eat now rasgulla or jalebi or sugar or whatever, that sucrose is not going to be allowed to now bind to the taste bud. And I'm so sorry that you have lost that sense of tasting sweetness for the rest of your life. It's fine. Why do you want to sort of taste sweetness? You enjoy sweetness by looking, observing and asking questions. Thank you.